Hi everybody, Brian Glynn here from Trōv. I'm delighted to be joined today by a genuine thought leader in the shared mobility space, CEO and founder of Movmi, Sandra Phillips. Sandra, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. This is exciting. I'm happy to be here and chat about shared mobility.
Great. So before we dive in, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and what Movmi does, and I suppose the gap in the market that Movmi addresses.
We're in like a very short phrase, we're a consulting agency focused on shared mobility only. So we're very niche in what we're dealing with. And when I talk shared mobility, it's really anything from car share to micromobility. Most of our work is focused on e-mopeds and electric bikes. Some kick scooter work as well. And then the last piece, which I really think is an important piece, also looking forward, you know, in the current situation we're at, is integrating this small shared vehicle space with the larger, much larger public transportation, which is also shared mobility and has been around for decades. So how do we connect these two more efficiently? So I talk about integrated transportation. Yeah, that's really what we do. Within that, because we're super niche, we're doing anything from market research to business case, feasibility studies, all the way even to project implementation. We've probably done, I'm trying to think, over half a dozen across the globe. So anything from, you know, a car share in the Middle East, the very first ever, to a public transit, bike share, car share integration in Vancouver, which is where we're based.
Very good, great. And it seems like you've had a chance to work across a pretty broad range of both operators, cities, and modes. And I'm sure you've had a chance to see lots of organizations who've done things really, really well and seen a lot of maybe the more common mistakes that are made along the way. If there was kind of maybe one piece of advice of one of the things that operators commonly maybe overlook or forget to think about when it comes to launching a new mobility service, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on what that maybe one often forgotten piece might be.
I really think you have to think of shared mobility as a service. It's, you know, focus on that piece. The product is nice. You have to provide a reliable service that people, I guess, can rely on for whatever they need to do. And then reliability comes before desirability is what I always say, right? The product isn't nice. If you have a nicer vehicle and it's closer, you might choose that. But if you have to walk half across town, it's not a reliable service. Now, with that service approach, you also have to really work with the city you're in to get to this reliable network, right? It's not about just placing a bunch of scooters or cars across the city. You have to have a partnership. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to use an example of a city that I would say learned a lesson and changed their approach to this, and that's Calgary in Canada. Mm-hmm. They had a car share, Car2Go launched there, and they were super excited because most bigger car share bypass Calgary. It's a smaller market in Canada, right? And then Car2Go was there for about 5 years and pulled out last fall, before they pulled out of all the North American markets. You have to know that the margins in the business are very small. So you can't have a city that charges an extremely high parking fee, which all, especially car share, they all rely on that real estate space in the city, right, to distribute the vehicles. So they pulled out. What happened? Car sales went through the roof in Calgary because all of a sudden, a third of the population, I think, was stranded without options anymore. So they bought their own car because there wasn't another player. So the city approached a bunch of operators. They also approached Movmi and said, what can we do to attract another player? Mm-hmm. Our citizens really like the service, and we literally just left them hanging now. And so in the last couple of months, they literally changed their policy framework, and they were able to attract another big player. It's a Canadian player, Cominoto, out of the east side, but they committed to launching Calgary again. So I think it's service first and partnership with city. That's kind of the two pieces.
Right. So you mentioned Calgary there, and I know coming up here in the next, very soon, the next couple of days, you're part of the initiative for the Car Sharing City Awards.
Yes.
It'd be great to maybe hear a little bit around kind of what motivated you to put these awards together. And also if you could maybe give us any kind of sneak peeks into other cities, the likes of a Calgary, who understand this, right? Who get that it has to be a joined up approach and who are taking maybe more ambitious steps into the world of shared mobility. It'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, the CarShare City Award it's the first year that it's being celebrated. And really the idea is to celebrate the cities that do policy frameworks really well. And when I say really well, they do it well so that it's successful for the city's transportation goal, greenhouse gas reduction goals, but also it's sustainable for the operator. So it's a long-term partnership. It's not seeing operators, whether it's CarShare or micromobility, in this case is CarShare, as a private business that you can extract as much value as possible, right? So it's really to celebrate and shine a spotlight on the cities that do that well, and also to a certain degree kind of shine a light on what other cities could be doing, because sometimes it's difficult to know, if you're a smaller city, what should I be doing? What is the right framework to do this, right? So that's really the objective of the award. And we're super impressed. For our first award, we have received 27 nominations from across the globe. So we have, obviously a lot of North American and European cities, because there is a lot of car sharing in those places, but also Middle East has submitted 3. India, we have 2, we have South America, and we even have Australia in the mix. And we have 2 awards. We have a regional, which is a city smaller than 750,000 people, and then a metropolitan, anybody above 750,000, because obviously, different things work in different size cities. Yeah, and you asked me, can I give you a sneak peek? Yes, I can, because the judges have just looked at the nomination, and they've come, or we have a short list.
That's really interesting, Sandra. Maybe you can give us a little sneak peek into some of the cities involved?
Yes, so we have, on the regional side, we have all European cities, anything from Ljubljana, Bergen, Bremen, Lisbon, and Ghent. And then in the metropolitan category, we have a handful of European. The 3 M's, we always call them, Milan, Munich, and Madrid, are in the mix. And then, but we also have Paris and Vancouver and Calgary, because we have a tie for one of the slots. So we have 2 North American cities too in there.
Very good. And the awards take place when, or where can people find out more about them? Or maybe
it takes place on May the awards take place on May the 28th at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you want to find out where you can register, you can go to movmi.net. There is a page on the awards.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. I know ordinarily we might have been thinking about attending awards and events like that in person, but obviously we're all still in the midst of lockdown, or various stages of lockdown. But I suppose now, as we come to kind of the end of May, we're maybe thinking about what comes next, or what comes after lockdown. Certainly all the team at Trōv are excited to get back out there into the world, get back into the office, get our hair cut and all that kind of fun stuff. It's been really interesting to see some of the trends that, from a mobility perspective, that shelter in place or that lockdowns have kind of encouraged or enforced, and trying to think about would there be any maybe silver linings that might come out of this kind of lockdown. I mean, one of the things you've seen a lot about is these new open streets, or safer streets, or slow streets initiatives. It seems like in Stanley Park in Vancouver, there's been some of that here in the Bay Area and Oakland and multiple cities all over the world. It'd be interesting if any of those initiatives are likely to become not just temporary, but maybe more permanent fixes, or if there's any other kind of silver linings that this lockdown might have from a mobility perspective.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the one type of transportation that has seen an increase is active, right? Biking, walking, there's a lot more people actively moving, obviously in a smaller geographical radius. So you have, on the one hand, you have active transportation that has seen an increase, and infrastructure is being put in place. And I mean, cities like, there's London, I'm trying to remember, there's about 3 European cities that have publicly committed to keeping those temporary lanes and bike infrastructure in place even post-COVID. So that's one area. And I think the other area is obviously where we do a lot of the work is, the shared mobility / public transportation. So both modes have seen drastic reductions in demand when we put lockdown in place and work from home measures. But because public transit has this challenge of, you know, sanitization plus physical distancing, which you have a lot less on a bike share. You have the sanitization problem, but not the physical distancing problem. I really believe this is the time coming out of recovery where shared mobility can play a crucial role in getting out without getting into another age of the car. The last thing we want is what happened in Calgary, and quite frankly, in, you know, Milan, for instance, car sales have gone up after or during COVID because people want to feel safe, right? So how do you do that? And I think that's where shared mobility can play a crucial role in building you'd have to think of an alternative mobility ecosystem that is resilient in the face of a crisis, and that's what shared mobility would really do, I think. We have a task force, and one of the things... I was
going to ask you about the task force.
So the task force, the shared mobility COVID task force, is really focused on, you know, providing best practices for the operators during the crisis, but also broader to educate stakeholders around what is the place of shared mobility in a bigger ecosystem. You know, you have public transit who has groups that advocate for them, and then you have the automotive sector that advocates, and then you have this big piece in the middle that somebody needs to speak up for. So that's the other part of the task force.
Right.
And one of the things we keep talking about is, I don't know if you remember children's book Dr. Lorax by Dr. Seuss, you know, and at one point the Lorax says, you know, talks about the very last seed of the special tree, and he's like, it's not about what it is, it's about what it can become. And I'm not saying we're down to the very last seed on the shared mobility. I know there's been cuts everywhere. I don't think that's quite the case, but it really is, what can it become now that we move out of this? And can it become, I would say, more integrated into the fabric of our cities as a true alternative to car ownership?
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of the organizations and the operators that understand that, or that understand that need for maybe the flexibility, and you understand their kind of need as a key public service, are the ones that have, you know, done really well during this difficult time. You know, partners of us at Trōv, Free to Move, have made vehicles available for first responders. I know Revel, I think you're an advisor at Revel, have done similar in certain markets. And that's great to see that these types of organizations understand the role they play in that ecosystem.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. It is an essential service. And I think especially essential workers. There's been a research paper a couple of weeks ago that came out and showed that, you know, there's a certain like essential workers are a certain segment that really heavily rely on public transit, often can't afford or don't have their own car. And so how do we make sure that we move those people safe? And I think, I know shared mobility operators across the globe have really stepped up. You know, there's a lot of offers for healthcare workers and medical teams by shared mobility provider, but there's also a lot of offers right now that just target essential workers and give them an alternative that is affordable to get to and from work during really odd shift times, right? They often have shifts all across the hours or across the clock.
Absolutely. Well, Sandra, it's been really interesting to hear your thoughts. Thank you again for joining us. If people want to keep up to speed with what you're working on or what you're doing, where can they find out more about yourself and about Movmi?
I would say the easiest place is go to movmi.net. That's www.movmi.net. The COVID task force is there. Car Sharing City Award is there. All the work we're doing is there. That's the easiest way to stay connected with us.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Sure.